Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video we're going to be talking about the Priory of the Sacred Flame dungeon, a new dungeon in the War Within, and basically how blown away I was by it. And then we'll kind of transition talking about why things like this are good for World of Warcraft in general. So this is the Priory of the Sacred Flame dungeon, one of the new dungeons in the War Within. It's been talked about before, when it first was played on Alpha and stuff like that. But I thought it'd be, nice to kind of just talk about it as a dungeon and not talk about it as a run or how big the pulls are or whatever, and kind of break down how awesome it is. And I had the thought to do this because this is one of the first times I felt this way in World of Warcraft in a very, very long time, especially in a dungeon. There have been raid fights, I will say, and raids in general that are like, oh wow, this is a spectacle. But this is a dungeon that kind of does that. You just kind of come in here and it doesn't look very cool to start. It's a nice big corridor here. And you come in and immediately you have this big open court here. I don't know what else to call it, a court. A big open area. And then you can kind of see this giant church. And if you know anything about this zone, you see this giant light behind it. Look how it's framed. Even this is cool, right? And you kind of know what this is if you've looked into anything at all. But we'll see what it is at the very end if you haven't seen it at the very end of running through this. So there's tons of trash in here, and I'm sure people have talked about this already. So there's potential to do like these really cool, really big pulls. This first part is kind of like a little encounter thing that they've done before, where you have to kill like little lieutenants, and that causes people to leave the boss's side, and then you get to fight the boss solo, or you can try to fight the boss with the lieutenants. It's one of those kind of things. In the center here is actually a buff that increases or gives you extra holy damage if you grab this buff. And so you can touch this, and so that's really cool, especially for a rep paladin or whatever. So there's extra holy damage there. And so you do this, you clear the court, clear as much stuff as you can, then you head up to the next steps. Up here, there's just going to be a lot more like training areas and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll get to and I think the boss is like in front of these steps is where it ends up being at. And then we get up to the actual like big church looking thing. And right away I'm like, okay, so this is kind of like Scarlet Monastery, right? This is like an updated, high res, cool looking Scarlet Monastery. And that's kind of true, but it actually, in a lot of ways, maybe because it is newer, it's actually cooler. So you come into this first room here, and it doesn't look too spectacular because it's not that big, but it's pretty tall. And what's really cool is you have two bosses standing up here on this balcony, and they do like a little talk to you or whatever, but not like a thing where you can't fight. There's some trash in here, and then they send more trash down as you kill it. And then when you kill like all the trash that they send down to you, all the mobs, one of the bosses jumps down and one of them walks back into that doorway there. And then so you have a boss fight right here. And we're not going to get too far into the boss fights, but this is cool. It's just like this room in itself is very, very cool room. I mean, it just has that feel to it of being like this spectacular dungeon. So then we're going to come all the way up these stairs, and now you're kind of like into this straightway path. And I really like here. So, there's obviously mobs and stuff in here. Then you have to open this door, which then leads you up to another staircase to another door, right? And this is like, you're literally ascending as you're going through the dungeon, right? If you notice, from where we started to where we are now, we've gone up like tons of staircases. We're literally ascending, and we get to this final room. And obviously this final room is extremely grandiose. This is a spectacle. This is where you have a boss battle in like any kind of game, right? This is like, you're clearly going to have a big boss battle in this room. This room is absolutely spectacular. It's super high ceilings. They put balconies up here, even though you can't get up there. You can't go over there. They even put these little side areas on that you can't get to just for the looks, right? And this place just looks so, so cool. You defeat like a little mini boss. You come up here, and that final boss who walked out of the balcony is back here. And again, this is kind of like a spectacular fight as well. So in a way where it has like phases technically. So phase 1, you get like 50%, and then she jumps up here, and then you do like the second phase up here at the very top. And so it's like a little two-part thing. And then after you defeat the thing, we had the light framed in the chapel or whatever before we came in, and we can see that it's the giant crystal that's poking through and giving light to this whole zone essentially, right? Basically what their sun is in a lot of ways. And so that is poking through, and you can kind of just see it perfectly. It's just perfectly framed, and it's just absolutely cool. I would say the last time, and as we kind of transition now into talking about why this is so good for World of Warcraft, the last time I really felt this way was probably a raid, and it was probably Castle Nathri in Shadowlands, right at the beginning of Shadowlands. And a lot of people really loved that raid. That raid was so cool because it was a spectacle, right? You were in a castle. It felt like you were in a castle. You were ascending the castle, right? Just like this. And there is something to being inside a castle or inside this big monastery or whatever this building would be called. When you're inside something like this, it does add something to it. It doesn't have to be this though. It could be something else. Like if you're talking about like the old days, like going through Blackrock Depths, for example. Now that's a very, very big dungeon, but like you're actually like going through a city, and it feels like you're going through a city when you're in Blackrock Depths. And when we look at so the last time I felt like it personally was all the way back in Shadowlands in like I said, in Castle Nathria. As far as dungeons go, it's really hard to say. I will say there have been like individual fights that have felt spectacular. In a lot of ways, Sarkareth felt that way in Dragonflight. Sarkareth felt a little bit spectacular. It was very fast paced. You went as far as the raid goes, like you did like the raid part, then you drop down to the secret area. There's Void down there. There was a little bit of spectacle in that raid. But as far as dungeons go, I was trying to think of when the last time like there was like a spectacle of a dungeon. Because like Algathar Academy is a great dungeon, but it's not like spectacular in any way. Halls of Infusion, not really spectacular. It's just pretty bland. It doesn't feel like you're going through a Titan facility. It feels like you're going through a World of Warcraft dungeon. Now Theros doesn't feel spectacular. Basically none of these do feel spectacular. Even the mega dungeon didn't really feel spectacular in this case. And I would say normally the mega dungeons are kind of the ones where they hit that note. I love Ruby Life Pools personally, but again, it's just not anything super special there. When we go into Shadowlands dungeons, the other side, very kind of bland dungeon. Halls of Atonement, nothing spectacular. Mists of Tyranid Scythe, you have like that little game or whatever, but that's more annoying to a lot of people, I think, than cool. Plaguefall, very bland. Just very bland dungeons. Overall, like nothing like this that where you're like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. And then you can go all the way back to now I will say the mega raid, the Tel'Zavesh was a little bit, because it was a big dungeon or whatever they call it, mega dungeon. It did have a little bit extra to it. And we can just keep going back, and there hasn't been these just big grandiose things in a while. And you might feel a little bit different about some of these than I do, but the reality is like it's hard to make an argument that like the other side is grandiose, right? It's just a circle. You go into a different area and it has a different stuff, and then you go fight the boss in the center, right? At the end of the day, it's nothing grandiose about it. And what I think is so good about this for the game, and I talk about this a lot as far as like updating content and like for example, one thing I say all the time: can we just have Nomergan as a city for the gnomes, right? Can we make Nomergan? You could have the mecha gnomes live there as well. You could have it be part mecha gnome, part Nomergan, whatever, and like just have this functional city. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of work to make that city, and not a ton of people are going to go there all the time. But like, there's something about that's what makes World of Warcraft so cool, is the world itself. When you feel like you're in Denathrius's castle, and everybody loved that raid. And you know what? It didn't have the best boss fights. In fact, Stone Legion Generals was like one of the worst boss fights. And yet everybody seemed to really, really love Castle Nathri. Now, Denathrius himself was a really, really cool boss, and that's a big reason why people like it as well. But it also just felt like you were in a castle. It felt like you were ascending the castle and like, getting to the top and then fighting the guy and winning, right? And that's what Castle Nathria felt like. And, having those things in the game is just so cool for the game. And it's what sets it apart, really. It's the world of Warcraft. I talk about it all the time. It is the world. I hear people all the time saying, oh, make the raids like this. Oh, take all trash out of the raids. Now, I agree. Sometimes there's too much trash in the raids. And trash that are in a raid should have a function of showing you like how a mechanic works or something like that. And sometimes they do that. But I do think that there are many cases where there is too much trash in the raid and it just becomes kind of annoying. And so I think like hitting that correct mark of, okay, there's like a couple trash pulls that show you how this mechanic works. There's a lieutenant that shows how this mechanic works. And then we go to the boss instead of having like 15 trash pulls, right? But having some trash in here also lets you like make it feel like it's being lived in or it's being guarded. Like having in the previous boss room where they send the troops down to come after you, right? In like a kind of a, you know, like a just the opposite of Zul'Farrak, where they come up the stairs. They're coming down the stairs at you. You know, that is like, it makes it feel like, oh, we're sending in the troops from the main room to come after you. It feels like it's not lived in, but just like that it's alive, right? And when you take all that stuff out and you just go, okay, here's the boss room, here's the next boss room, here's the next boss room, and those boss rooms can still be really, really cool, but it takes something away from it when it's not like this like livable area, really. And not every dungeon has to be this way, nor would I expect them to be, right? Not every raid fight. I think every raid should try to be a spectacle. I think every raid should try to capture because they put so much time into these raids, right? And they put time into the dungeons too, but they make 8 of them at a time or whatever. So I'm not saying every dungeon has to be this, but you know, like not every dungeon has to be Brackenhide Hollow either. So Brackenhide Hollow, I don't personally have anything against Brackenhide Hollow in Dragonflight, but you know, it's just a big flat land, and for the most part, you know, there's some elevation change, but it's just like a big flat land with a bunch of knolls in it, right? It's not spectacular at all. It doesn't have this feel to it, and when it has this feel to it, it actually does make the trash seem less bad or more fun. And trash is already fun in dungeons because you're usually mass AoEing it down and, you know, doing very high DPS and stuff like that. But like it just has a better feel to it when it's like that, when it's presented to you in a certain way. And I think people don't think about that a lot. I think, you know, things like sound and stuff, a lot of people play their sound off, including me a lot of times, but the sound of things can really tie things in. And you know, that's really what makes World of Warcraft different than a lot of other games that try to be like it, is that they try to cut the corner of it not being like a world. And I think, you know, even World of Warcraft has done that, you know, as time has gone on. But then every once in a while they release something like this, or they release something like Castle Nathria. It reminds you what World of Warcraft is. World of Warcraft is Scarlet Monastery. World of Warcraft is Blackrock Depths. World of Warcraft is, you know, even Firelands was, or not Firelands, sorry, Molten Core was like somewhat of a spectacle with Ragnaros coming out of the lava for that old time, right? Like nowadays that wouldn't be considered that crazy or cool. But back then it was kind of cool to have that happen, and you had to like summon him and stuff like that. But like that is what World of Warcraft is. World of Warcraft is a massive, cool city like Ironforge. It's not even your main city. And all of these cities, half of them aren't even used, and most of them, not all of them, are very, very cool in their own ways. And that's what World of Warcraft is. It's having that world. It's like being able to go back to so I'm on a dwarf character, right? Being able to go to Twilight Highlands and like see the Wildhammer dwarves, and like, and that's something that needs to get updated. Like I say, to update things, you know, the Wildhammer dwarves don't need like a mega city really, because that's not really their style of how they live. But they could just have like one functioning, because a lot of their villages are still like broken apart and stuff like that. So you could have like one functioning village or something for the Wildhammer dwarves and stuff like that. It just makes the game so cool. And when they do update things, it makes it so cool. Like when they ever, you know, the city that gets updated the most for Alliance at least is Stormwind. And I don't know if it's Orgrimmar for the Horde, but it probably is. Like, you know, when they built the nice harbor and stuff like that. And having that stuff, it just makes it feel like a world. And this is just the feeling that I got, and I haven't had this feeling. As much as I enjoy Dragonflight, I didn't really get this feeling in Dragonflight at all. I never felt like I was in a grandiose thing. And occasionally I did feel like I was in a grandiose boss fight. Like in a raid. Like some of the raid fights were very grandiose and they were very well done. And, you know, I appreciate those things. But just having this entire dungeon feel really, really cool, or having an entire raid, and it's going to be harder to capture the raid, obviously, but having an entire raid like Castle Nathria just feel so cool is I think what they need to be aiming for. And like every patch should have something. Every expansion should start off with having something grandiose, something that's like, wow, this is World of Warcraft. And like every in my opinion, like I said, every patch, maybe every raid should aim to have something like this. It's like, oh, this is the world of Warcraft. And you know, I don't talk about this stuff a ton on this channel, but I do talk about a little bit whenever I see people saying how to improve World of Warcraft. This is the kind of stuff I like to talk about. It's the world of Warcraft. People get caught in the nitty-gritty of it, but the reason why the game still has so many players at the end of the day is because it's a world, and it's like a living world. And some people, you know, because it was even more alive back in Classic, that's why there's still so many people who loved Classic, because it felt like a living world that they were in. And like, even take the dungeons of Burning Crusade. The dungeons of Burning Crusade were nothing like the dungeons of original Classic, even though they were newer. You know, they didn't have that same feeling as far as, like, if you think of like all the Hellfire dungeons, right? They're all just corridors that you run through. You know, some of them feel more livable than others, or that makes you believe that the orcs live there or whatever. But it's like, it's not the same thing. So whoever made this dungeon, whoever worked on this at all, you guys did a great job. And this is the kind of stuff I love to see. Everything else I talked about as well, as far as the world, but I absolutely love this dungeon, and you know, couldn't say anything more great about it, I don't think. So that's going to be it for this one. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel. That helps me out a lot. If you're already a subscriber, I did just start a Patreon. I would encourage you to check that out if you can. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.